And from our reading this week that Paul is in Athens. He has a good look around, but looking around he gets distressed. And if you can see from the pictures that Michelle and I took a few years ago when we went to Ephesus, you can see the type of things that he would be looking at in that city. A straight street, maybe the town square, the marketplace. And in that place, there were the tall pillars that would keep up the great building, the great colleges of thinking. Athens was where the Greek theologists would be giving out their teaching. But with that Greek thinking came a real mix of theologies, of teaching, of ideas, of philosophies. And as Paul's looking around, he's getting quite distressed, because here there is a statue to one god, there's an altar to another god, and clearly there are signs that the people are searching for something to get hold of, because he comes to one altar and it said, "This is the altar to the unknown God." I reckon he stood at that altar and he looked at it and he pondered over it, and then looked around again and he saw all the altars, the statues, the sculptures, the huge buildings, all dedicated to different gods. And here he was, standing in front of an altar that said, "To the unknown God." Oh, what a great opening for Paul. As I've walked around, or as I've lived my life around the country, on our wall at home, we have 3 pictures that identify the 3 places that we've been before we came to this point. We have a picture of St. Michael's Mount, which stands out in the sea. We have the Millennium Bridge, along with the Baltic Centre, which used to be a flour mill, and the Great Sage Music Centre that's on the edge of the Tyne there in Gateshead. And we have a picture of Durham and Durham Cathedral. And as we've looked through the different pictures as I've been speaking, and as I walk through our very own Canary Wharf, and we see the statues, we see the tall, huge buildings reaching the sky, we see the support pillars that are supporting some of the buildings, or are just there to give the building a little bit of style. And the statues, we don't know what those statues mean, some of them, but they're there. And as we look at them, we get a sense of what they are by who we think we are. And there's loads of different opportunities, even in this area here of London, that we see buildings, we see the logo that are on buildings, we see statues that are dedicated to individuals. It was interesting that when Paul addresses the group of religious leaders who were philosophers from lots of different backgrounds, he starts with these words: "Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious." Well, if you look at some of our cities, you look at Durham, where you have the cathedral high above. As you're coming into Durham, you have that picture of the cathedral and the castle. If you look at a picture of London, right in the centre of that picture is St. Paul's Cathedral. You go into Westminster and it's dominated by Westminster Abbey. And I suppose in our own area here, we see the spire of All Saints Church. We see the roof of the Catholic Church, the end of Grundy Street. Icons of their age and what identifies the area. But then there's one picture that I've got there is of the city of Newcastle. And right at the top, towering over everything in Newcastle, is St James's Park, Newcastle United football ground. I wonder what Paul would have said had he walked through modern Britain. I think he could say very similar. He could say, men of Tower Hamlets, men of Newcastle, men of Durham, men of London. But now we would have to say men and women, because we would all be met together. But what would he say about us? What would he say about you as individuals? I think he would look upon London, look upon Canary Wharf and say, well, clearly something is going on here. Clearly you have a desire to reach the sky, a desire to gain the light. But I wonder whether he would see our tall buildings dedicated to Barclays, to HSBC, Citibank, PJ Morgan. I wonder whether he would look upon those buildings and see them as where man's religion has taken him. And if he looked in our market, at the betting shops, at the pub, looked on any high street, especially in a poorer area, and see the pawn shops, the jewellers who are offering money for jewellery, cash converters, and things like that. I wonder what Paul would say, would speak into that. But you know, he didn't condemn, pull down, destroy anyone's thinking or anyone's opinions. He came to the point where he said, this unknown God is the one that unites us all. He's the God who created everything. He's the God who keeps the universe going. He's the God who cares, a God who loves, a God who has led his people. He doesn't need statues. He doesn't need buildings built to reach the skies, to reach God, because he's right here. For this God who created everything by his Spirit from nothing. And he leads mankind through every crisis and every chaos that comes along. No, not only did he create the whole world, but he created you and me in his image. So we are born to know the unknown God. We are born to follow his leading. We are born to share his image. I wonder what altar we worship at. It shouldn't be the altar of the unknown God, because he's there to be known. He's there to be in relationship with. And he's there to be in our lives above the likes of Barclays, HSBC, above our desire to shop in some of the shops that we've seen today, above our desire to own a watch. Remember the video we watched just a few minutes ago? A young man who had everything, a young man who was able to go wherever he wanted to go, in whatever car he chose, and live in whatever size house that he wanted, wherever he wanted. And he found God, and found that the emptiness of being a footballer was filled by being in relationship with the guy who created him in his image. And now he is fully satisfied, living a life of poverty. You know, there's a lot to think about. When Paul looked around, How about us looking around our lives and see what altars could be done away with and how better we can worship a God that we know?